G'day, chaps, tis I, Clumpucher139. After recently doing a completion run for Batman Arkham Origins Blackgate, as it was the only Arkham game I hadn't gotten 100% for, I came to learn that this game's world building is just as good as the rest of the Arkham saga. There's a crazy story unfolding in the background that I have a feeling almost none of you knew about. I'd completely dismissed it, because I simply never knew about the detective cases sprinkled throughout this game. Detective cases are essentially this game's equivalent of Riddler collectibles, where after collecting certain ones, you unlock little stories that explain events leading up to what we see play out during the events of Arkham Origins Blackgate. And these things go into some crazy detail about things I never knew I needed the answers to, as well as some things that I was pretty much instantly criticizing when I first played the game. Why is Grundy in Blackgate? Who is Bronze Tiger, and why was he locked up in Penguin's arena? How did the three kingpins so easily take over their respective areas of the prison? What caused the explosion that started the riot in the first place? All these questions and more are answered when you solve these detective cases. Unfortunately, these cases are really friggin' hard to solve. You have to find teeny tiny pieces of evidence in the cramped hallways of Blackgate and scan them with the evidence scanner. And some of these pieces are literally impossible to find without a guide because of how friggin' small they are. But all that is neither here nor there. We're not here to criticize game design, we're here to analyze story. So, let's start analyzing the 14 case files that paint a very different story to the background of Blackgate. Let's start with a case that actually answers one of my questions from over 2 years ago. Why is Solomon Grundy in Blackgate? Well, let's read case file 60 Feet Under to find out. In the sewers of the industrial wing, we can find skeletal remains ranging from a few weeks all the way to a few years of decay, all of which are in prison uniforms and almost all missing their skulls. There's also moss not native to sewers like this. This kind of moss favors being in direct sunlight, meaning that it couldn't have grown here naturally. Something or someone must have dragged it in somehow. And finally, a circus poster, several decades old, advertising an albino strongman as the headliner. Combining all of this evidence with Batman personally encountering and fighting off Grundy, and the picture becomes a lot more clear. Grundy has been Grundy instead of Cyrus Gold for decades at this point, and my assumption that he was a newcomer to Gotham was simply wrong. Apparently, Grundy has been a myth across Gotham for a long time, primarily residing in Slaughter Swamp. However, he makes the sewers of Blackgate his home when the weather becomes less hospitable. Basically, Grundy's a snowbird, and Blackgate is his winter home. It is around March during Origins Blackgate, so it would no doubt be absolutely freezing in a swamp at this point in time. Either way, he's made these sewers his home. But over time, a lot of prisoners had tried making their escape through said sewers. None of them were able to make it very far, as they pretty much always ran into Grundy, who prefers the much more violent method of ripping off and crushing the escapee's skull, rather than Batman's casual beating to a pulp. And that right there answers it. That is why Solomon Grundy was in Blackgate. I still stand by the idea that it should have been Killer Croc as the boss fight, but really upon reading this, it actually makes a lot more sense why Grundy is there in the first place. He was never locked up, just hiding out. And in a way, Batman basically broke into his home and beat him up for it. So, who's really in the wrong here? What's fascinating to me about these cases is that they actually reveal that every single villain we face was already plotting their escape long before the explosion that kicked things into motion. Penguin, Black Mask, and Joker were pretty much all right on the verge of starting their own breakouts, which to me at least really helps explain how they were able to take over their respective wings of the prison so easily. They were already going to within the next few days. But that bomb going off and putting the prison into chaos basically gave all of them a jumpstart on their plans. We'll go over each of their escape plans in a moment, but first, what actually set that bomb off in the first place? Most probably assumed that it was Catwoman. I mean, she was the one tasked with getting Bane out of the prison, so why shouldn't she be the one to set off the inciting incident? Well, it actually wasn't her, but instead a villain that we've yet to see for real in the series. Only in a dream where we're playing as a bunch of idiots with guns. That villain being Toyman. For one reason or another, Toyman was affixed with an explosive bracelet that was smuggled into the prison. This was almost certainly against his will because sometime down the line, he tried to deactivate and remove the wristwear. Unfortunately, in doing so, with homemade tools that he fabricated in the prison no less, he set off the explosive, killing him and dealing significant damage to Blackgate in the process. To me, this screams prototype neck bombs for the Suicide Squad. If anything, it's basically saying that Toyman was the very first member of Task Force X, and that his mission was likely to assist Catwoman in breaking Bane out. However, as it seems is always the case with at least one TFX member, he got cold feet and tried to back out. But nobody backs out on Amanda Waller, so kaboom! Hasta la vista, Toyman, and Blackgate security at the same time, as this explosion rocks the prison so much that basically everyone was able to escape. It does leave you wondering why something as small as a bracelet was able to do this much damage to the prison, especially since we've seen how precise Waller's neck bombs can be. Though we could assume that it was intended to be a much more contained explosion, and Toyman's tinkering with it ended up causing the explosion to be a lot bigger than it was meant to be. Either way, it's clear that this was not Waller's plan in the slightest. She was expecting a much more subtle execution of the plan, likely with Toyman simply disabling some security systems as Selina stealthily made her way into the Arkham wing to free Bane. Which really means that everything that happened in Blackgate was just a crazy set of coincidences with absolutely no intention of being as chaotic as it was. But because all the villains happened to be plotting their escapes at the same time as Waller trying to break Bane out, and Waller's mission didn't go according to plan at all, it just all went down as another difficult night for Batman to clean up. So now, let's go into a few specifics of those breakout plans. Starting with the simplest of them, the Penguin.
I'm talking common sense. I mean, obviously I'm one of the least dangerous blokes in here. I mean, look at me.
Oswald was plotting and successfully carrying out an escape attempt for a long time, as we learn in the case, Bird of Prey. Penguin and his men were using tiny little gardening spades to dig tunnels out of Blackgate, basically an underground version of Shawshank Redemption. They were able to pull this off thanks to a timetable sheet listing out all of the guards' rotations and shift changes. They were doing pretty well for themselves. Assuming Penguin was locked up for about 3 months like everyone else, they were likely pretty close to completely breaking out. But the explosion changed their plans, an unforeseen opportunity to greatly speed up their escape. They made their way to the weapons lockup, where Batman finds an industrial-grade torch along with a burnt and broken security pad. The crew were able to steal a torch from a maintenance contractor coming in to do repair work on the prison. Penguin used it to burn up the security lock, then used his trusty spade that he was previously using to dig as the last bit of leverage to pry it loose. This allowed him to arm his men and force his way out of Blackgate. And as we learn in Cell Block Birdcage, those weren't the only measures they took while storming the prison. They also destroyed all the security cameras in sight so that nobody could watch them, and used power boxes around the prison to electrify any doorways guards would use to be coming in to stop them. These electrocuted guards got knocked unconscious and were then used as human shields to repel any further attacks. Which is so ridiculously dark, but very on brand for this series, so I don't know what else I expected. Although, one weird thing is that it's pretty obvious from just playing the game that Penguin didn't actually see through with escaping. He had every opportunity to storm out of the prison after arming his men and taking hostages, but he very notably didn't. He stayed behind and set up the fighting pit as Batman made his way in and started to get things under control. Why is that? He'd been plotting this escape for months, and this perfect opportunity just fell into his lap, and he didn't take it. Well, we get hints as to why in A Life on the Line. After the explosion, prisoners stormed the guard offices, giving the men on duty no time to respond. They broke down the door, keeping them out, and seized the lone man inside. They then took a noose and began to hang the guard by the neck from an overhead pipe. Luckily for the guard, a much more friendly prisoner, Ben Turner, was making his way back inside. Bronze Tiger, having procured his claw gloves from lockup, used them to slice through the pipe and save the guard's life. This is even further proof that Turner really was not a bad guy, just someone who made a few too many bad choices. He makes the decision to atone for those choices, even trying to save the life of someone that was keeping him incarcerated. He then tried to fend off the attackers to protect himself and the guard further, but the sheer numbers seemed to overwhelm him, and all that remained at the scene was the guard's bloodied shirt, having taken some damage from the claw swipe, and one of Ben's slippers, as he was dragged off to be thrown into Penguin's arena.
I'm sorry, Batman, but I'm sure you'd do the same in my position.
I wouldn't be in your position, Turner.
To me, this implies that Penguin either saw or at least heard these events unfold, and as such decided to brand Turner a traitor, which made Cobblepot change up his plan a little bit. He doesn't just want to escape, he wants to make a show out of it. We've seen time and time again that Penguin loves very little more than a good old-fashioned fighting pit. The boiler deck fights in Origins, the gladiator pit in the city, it's basically his thing. So, why not make the best of his current powerful position and make good use of a traitor in the most fun thing he can imagine for himself and his fellow prisoners? He's got all night to escape, and this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Who else is really going to be able to say that they broke out of Blackgate and used the prison itself as a fighting arena to make traitors kill each other? Currently, only Oswald.
To the death, Batman! Finish him!
Just do it.
No.
This is my arena, Batman! You're my toy to play with!
By comparison, the Joker's breakout was simultaneously a lot more complex, but also simple. It's weird, let me explain. So remember how Joker was ranting about being a property owner just before his fight, and that Batman was considered to be a trespasser now by law? As funny as that speech was, it wasn't just a one-off line meant to make the audience laugh. It was genuinely part of Joker's motivation in this game. As we learn from the case, no laughing matter. This case features a crudely drawn map of the prison, with Happyland, Smiletown, and Murderville written over the cell blocks, industrial plant, and administrative wing respectively, as well as a large book called Principles of Large Facility Ventilation, heavily annotated with red and green crayons from the prison library. See, Joker absolutely loves Blackgate. Not being a prisoner there, even he isn't crazy enough to have Stockholm Syndrome, but he adores the location. A secluded island with wonderful views of the city and more buildings than he'd know what to do with. What's not to love? Well, the people, for one, so he planned to take care of that problem with some of his patented Joker gas, by pumping it through the ventilation system, intending to kill everyone in the prison. A simple, elegant, and brutal way to acquire his dream home. Although, in order to enact this plan, he's gonna need, Joker gas. Well, not to worry, because he's got that covered as well. As we see in the case, the Joker is wild. Which I believe is a reference to the animated series episode Joker's Wild, by the way. Joker wasn't just gonna wing it and leave things to chance. He was creating Joker toxin for a long time in the background, using some very unconventional methods while he was doing it. Starting by using, and I wish I could be making this up, cans of spray cheese, and a device that he fashioned himself from pipes and cloth to siphon nitrous oxide, one of the key components of the gas. He then took advantage of the chaos after the explosion to steal a gas mask of his own from the armory and use his supply of gas to kill as many guards as he could on the way to the admin wing, some of the results of which we see as we're heading inside. That was not the end of his plan, however, as we learn in the following story, Kidnapped. Throughout his excursion in the now Joker-fied building, Batman finds the assistant warden's body, a gunshot straight through the head. He also finds remnants of a map laying out the administrative wing and the sewers, with notes written in the assistant warden's handwriting. The warden's office portion of the map having been ripped away. As Joker stormed through the wing, he found the assistant warden and held him hostage. He forced the man to give details about the secret entrance to Warden Joseph's office, which he presumably gave because he thought it would save his own life. Unfortunately, Joker was not so merciful. He then used that information to catch Joseph by surprise in his own office. He used the secret tunnels to sneak in and ambushed him, leading to a scuffle between the two, where Joseph actually got a few good blows in, as shown by his graduation ring having remnants of Joker's pale white skin on it. Unfortunately, Joker was simply a better combatant and got the better of Joseph, even knocking out his newly added glass eye from just after the Christmas riots. This led to his capture and lockup that we see in the game, and explains how Joker found the secret path into his office.
I won't hide while my people need me. A hard case like Black Mask can take my eye, but I'll never let anyone take my staff.
One of the most interesting things about Joker's part of this story is that it shows that mad love has been going on this whole time, as we see in the Doctor's Orders detective case. Essentially, since the end of Origins to now, aka 3 months, Joker has been manipulating Harleen into becoming his new sidekick, and it's been working quite well. She's already adapted the Mr. J moniker with him, and has started her smuggling escapades by stealing the cheese whiz that he used from the cafeteria for him to make Joker toxin with. Meaning that Harleen is partially responsible for Joker breaking out and creating the toxin that he uses all throughout the admin wing. It's pretty surprising that even after all of this evidence comes up, it would still be another 3 months before Quinzel actually followed through and broke Joker out herself, fully completing the mad love story and turning into Harley Quinn. It's also strange that, as far as we can see, she's never been reprimanded for this. She gets in trouble for a whole bunch of other things throughout the prequel games, but never for the cheese smuggling. Either way, all these beautiful factors just came together in Joker's favor, and he was never one to look a gift horse in the mouth, so took advantage of all of them to take over the wing and acquire his dream home. Which still, I must reiterate, is a really friggin' funny motivation for doing all of this. Like, this is the one game where Joker isn't doing any of this to get at Batman. He's not trying to see how far he can push Batman to his limits, he's actually trying to stop him from kicking him out of his new homestead, and is genuinely just annoyed the more he succeeds, which is honestly hilarious, and a really refreshing take on Joker for this game that I just never saw.
And speaking as a homeowner, I believe you qualify as a prowler on private property, and I'm within my rights to defend my property at all costs!
I didn't really have a segue from any of the other cases into the bidding war, so I'm just putting it here because I feel like it. Deal with it. As Deadshot himself says when asked by Batman, all 3 of the Kingpins hired him for protection. It's unclear if he was hired before or after the explosion went off, but considering the hasty nature of some of his payments, I'm gonna assume after. Penguin offered bearer bonds, each one worth upwards of $10,000. Black Mask offered Krugerrands, which are a South African coin introduced back in the 60s. While their currency value is a mere 1 rand, which is less than 6 US cents, they are made up of 90% gold, which makes them really worth upwards of $2,000 in today's money. Assuming this picture is accurate, and Black Mask gave 4, he'd probably be paying a minimum of $8,000. And Joker, well, he didn't really pay at all. he just gave the hitman a big IOU written in blood for, and I quote, $11 billion. Why Floyd accepted that is beyond me, but apparently not beyond him. Deadshot took on all the offers not for the payment, but rather so that he could have free range of the prison, which he really just used to set up a target and practice his aim by throwing rocks at it in the shape of his initials. Though he would also use it in case the power balance were to shift. If one of the Kingpins got the advantage, he could easily join their side and stay on top, while keeping the money that he already got as a down payment from the others. It's a simple yet effective plan that'll ensure he pretty much can only win. But it's also really ironic that because of where he's placed in the game, he technically ends up protecting the one guy who didn't actually pay him anything. Like, he could have very easily just let Batman slip by and he wouldn't be at any loss to himself because Joker literally never paid him anything. At least if he was outside the cell blocks or industrial plant, he would actually be getting paid for his services. But it looks like the guys who paid him are the only ones not benefiting from his work. Really weird, but also pretty funny that that's how it worked out. Also, wait a minute, he should know from Christmas Eve that Joker isn't going to pay him anything. Because, remember, he was offered $50 million for the Bat's head, but that whole money scheme was totally bullshit. He should know that, shouldn't he?
And bad news for you, Bats. You definitely qualify as whatever else.
This leaves us with just one last crime boss to talk about, whose story is probably the most fascinating of the trio, Black Mask, starting with power play. Roman Sionis has been nursing a deep hatred for the Joker ever since his takeover of his crew on Christmas Eve. Every day he was reminded of what he'd lost through a photo of his late girlfriend that he kept in his cell. So he spent his incarcerated days plotting his revenge. He had his men track Joker's movements throughout the prison, using multiple different guys to get a sense of his routine without arousing suspicion. He stole a set of tools from the prison dentist, intending to torture his target by destroying his legendary smile. Which is very on brand for Black Mask. Being the torture aficionado that he is, he would find the most effective method to make Joker pay for everything he did, and be as cruel as possible to his target in the process. But when the explosion rocked Blackgate, Sionis made a break for the industrial plant, stealing a tablet from the director of operations with a new plan in mind. Taking over the plant and rerouting the power to flush Joker out and bring the clown to him. As the crew fought their way through the plant, which we see in Breakout Break-In, they encountered a lot of resistance. Lockdown protocols were quickly put in place to keep prisoners out. But seeing as Roman was the owner of a heavy-duty industrial complex for years, that being the steel mill, he likely knew the weaknesses of a plant like this. So he and his men severed hydraulic fluid cables, keeping many of the key doors meant to keep them out open. Any doors they couldn't stop from closing, they simply forced open with crowbars, which they later also used to force open weapon lockers to arm themselves. Then, with a homemade frequency modulator, a thing that they apparently just had. Look, the suspension of disbelief is one thing, but expecting a bunch of thugs who barely know how to count to 7 to make a device that can alter wave frequencies like the Asylum cryptographic sequencer to break through the tougher security doors is another thing entirely. But whatever, apparently it's just something that anyone with a middle school education can make in Gotham. Good to know. After opening the security doors, the power plant is theirs to do with as they pleased. And with weapons now at their disposal, they'd be able to crush any resistance in their way. Well, all resistance except for one lone guard. One guard was able to stand his ground in the power plant for a long time, barricading himself near the master turbine control, attempting to ward off the crew laying siege to the plant. Tons of shell casings can be found around the scene of the crime, implying a large firefight took place. But he knew that he couldn't hold out for very long. So he pulled out his phone and made one last call to his wife to say goodbye. He was eventually overrun, killed, and had his thumb removed so that the crew could use it for biometric scans throughout the complex. Which means that this one guard was the last obstacle in their way to taking over the entire plant and putting Black Mask's plan into full effect. He's now going to destroy the entire complex by overloading the generators, which will not only kill Joker, but also every other competitor who happens to be locked up in Blackgate with him. Which, as far as we know, really just means Penguin. But that would actually be kinda great for him. Penguin is not a major threat at this point in time, which Sionis and his men say multiple times in Arkham Origins.
Who's the Penguin? See, that's exactly my point. No one's even heard of this guy, and he's messing with the Falcones?
But as we all know, he's the only classic mobster left standing by the time of the Rocksteady trilogy. So taking Oswald out of the picture, along with, his greatest enemy, would kinda be the perfect set of events for Roman to have. At least, until Batman shows up. What's really funny to me is how Joker pays absolutely no mind to Sionis throughout this entire game. None of his lines of dialogue talk about him, none of his cases reference him, or the fact that he took over half the man's crew. It really feels like Joker just up and forgot about Black Mask's existence entirely after literally destroying his life. Which is really funny when you consider Roman's side of the story. He's building up this deep-seated resentment of the clown, which carries over into Arkham Shadow, so ends up lasting well over 6 months in total. And the J-Man can't even be bothered to acknowledge his existence. It is just perfectly on brand for Joker and just so sad for Roman. Bro had his entire life upended by this literal clown, goes about trying to get his revenge at every corner, but just ends up being locked in solitary after being foiled by Batman yet again. Bro just absolutely never catches a break.
You hit the nail on the head, Batman. I came to this hole to close the books on my competitors, especially the Joker.
The final detective case in the game, information gathering, is by far the most confusing, because even Batman can't seem to make heads or tails of it. But judging from the other pieces of information we were given, as well as just looking at the actual story, I think we can piece it together pretty easily. Throughout the administration building, we find various files on the supercriminals of Blackgate, specifically on Bronze Tiger, Deadshot, and a new face that we've never seen in the Arkhamverse up until now, Count Vertigo. These are tied together with a business card with only a phone number to call. No name, occupation, nothing, just a phone number, which apparently calls to a payphone in Metropolis. Batman has no idea who this could possibly be, but we, the audience, have outsider information that he doesn't. Since it's all about recruiting villains in the most secretive way possible, and because we know which villains in particular were being recruited, we know that this is all about Task Force X, Amanda Waller, and Rick Flag. Naturally, at the very end of the game, we see both Deadshot and Bronze Tiger have been recruited by Waller. And it seems that she had people working inside the prison feeding her information on them the whole time. More likely than not, there was a group of corrupt prison officials feeding her information via the payphone line, which is just an incredible way to misdirect anyone trying to get information on them. Not only is going to a payphone a great way to keep yourself secret, but the fact that they sent the call to Metropolis means that whoever starts investigating them is going to be investigating in the completely wrong city. Interestingly, and I'm adding this on as a bit of an addendum because I only just now learned this, but this phone number is actually an Easter egg in Arkham Shadow. Calling this number from a payphone won't actually redirect you to Metropolis. Instead, this is the Riddle of the Minotaur Easter egg, which references Riddler. And the way you're expected to find this is by reading a random newspaper in Blackgate as Malone and deciphering the secret message. Which is really weird because Rick Flag also has a phone number in the game that you can call, which directly references this exact case with Count Vertigo. Hell, it's found outside of Vertigo's room in the Arkham wing, and Rick answers the call assuming us to be Vertigo.
Sorry, then... Look, Vertigo, Count, dude, I know this is you.
I have a feeling something got mixed up during production and the two numbers were accidentally swapped. Why would Riddle of the Minotaur hotline take over a number that was originally going out to Metropolis, when the game was developed in Gotham, and take over a line that was previously used by criminals to get in touch with Task Force X? Especially when Rick Flag has his own number to call in the game, where he talks to the caller, presuming them to be Vertigo, saying that he didn't make the cut and to stop calling. This implies to me that it was supposed to be the original number from Blackgate, but something got mixed up in production. But all that, neither here nor there. Point being, calling the number literally gets us Rick Flag, who indirectly references Task Force X.
What can I say, Dizzy? You didn't make the cut. Stop calling us. Goodbye.
What all of these cases ultimately do is put the whole story of the game into a different perspective. This isn't just another long night for Batman. It's also the test run and eventual true creation of the Suicide Squad. This is their origin story in the Arkhamverse. I always just assumed that Waller took Turner and Lawton on a whim, like she saw them in action during the riot and grabbed them up as a backup plan after seeing that Batman was not going to be letting Bane go so easily. But it turns out that she was planning it the whole time. Though it is still definitely implied through the quick interludes of her watching them in action that it was a slight spur-of-the-moment decision. She was definitely going to recruit them sometime down the line, but seeing her operation was quickly crumbling and she would not be getting Bane made her improvise and grab these two while Batman was focused on the more pressing matter. More than anything, it shows that Waller really doesn't do unprompted recruitments. She needs to vet everyone that she plans to work with, which is why it took until the riot and their presumed escape for her to swoop in and take them for herself. That is just such a cool detail that frankly, it makes her seem a lot more like the Waller we know than she was previously. If anything, this whole video just shows how much Waller put into this plan and how much Batman derailed it. If he hadn't stepped in, so many things would have gone perfectly to plan for her, minus a few explosive deviations. And it really just shows how little they accounted for Batman. Because Batman really wasn't a consideration in their plans until very recently. Batman may have been uprooting crime for the past 2 years, but it wasn't until 3 months ago that he made a true public appearance and shook up the whole city. Nobody knew how he operated or how to deal with him anyway other than just shooting and praying. So what contingencies could they have made for the guy? They worked with what they had and still made out like bandits, all things considered.
You see degenerates, Captain? I see soldiers.
The team behind Batman Arkham Origins Blackgate put so much thought into the world building of this game. Many other designers would have just thrown in the plot synopsis and called it a day. A riot is broken out in Blackgate Prison, Batman needs to stop it, Catwoman was a traitor the whole time, the end. That's a perfectly acceptable story for a superhero game, and really all that they needed to do for this handheld port tie-in to the much more successful console release. But they didn't do that. In every single respect, the team behind this game went the extra mile to make this game stand out. They put in these 14 incredibly detailed detective cases to build up the lore, filling it out as much as every other Arkham game while also doing their research and making sure that it wouldn't contradict the existing pieces that we already had. All the while, making it a genuinely interesting story that I thoroughly enjoyed reading through my first time. They built up a mystery behind each of these cases, setting the stage with each of the individual pieces and giving the player a chance to figure it out on their own if they wanted to try. Then giving a full-blown plot synopsis that explains something that really didn't need to be explained, but which makes the entire story so much cooler now that it is. Armature Studios, this is my salute to you. Everyone may look at this game with nothing but criticisms, but I see all the incredible work you put in. You made something really special with Arkham Origins Blackgate, and I hope you all continue to make great work in your future. With all that being said, do all of the YouTube stuff, because this is the Suicide Squad game we deserve, people. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you later, chaps.
No! You might...
Where'd he go?
I don't know. But the Joker better watch his back.